Alison, welcome to the podcast. We'd love to hear more about Woebot. Could you tell people who you are? Tell us a little bit more about the company and what inspired you to start Woebot, please.
Sure, and thanks for having me. I'm Alison Darcy. Obviously, I'm the founder and president of a company called Woebot Health, and we're a sort of digital therapeutics company. We're making a behavioural health platform, basically, to support people's mental health. And we deliver cognitive behavioural therapy and other models as well for people with anxiety and depression symptoms, as well as postpartum depression and substance use disorder, using a relational agent called Woebot. I was a clinical scientist, and so I've always been sort of developing treatments and what have you, but it was really about access for me, that it doesn't really matter how, like sophisticated these treatments are that we create if people can't access them. And that's the reality of the clinic. Very few people are actually able to come through your doors. So I knew there had to be something in between a self-help book and the clinic, and particularly just trying to be able to intervene a little bit more upstream before things really become very problematic. And because we know in healthcare, like, that's actually the best time to intervene, when somebody has a little bit more space to make change and what have you.
Yeah, and much more impactful dealing before the problem exists than dealing after the problem exists. And is this, I know this is going to seem like a slightly odd question, is this a perfect time for your service? I.e., people can't really travel due to COVID into clinics or meet people. We're noticing society is a lot more accepting, if that's the right word, Alison, of mental health issues. And you've got AI technology and digital technology that's now capable of actually performing a really good service as opposed to 10 or 20 years ago.
That's right. Yeah, there's 20 years now of evidence that shows that digital solutions can be as effective as treatment delivered by a therapist in the conventional sense. And so, if they're designed well. And so exactly all of the things that you hit on there, Kieran, so you've given the answer. The pandemic really changed everything in terms of mental health. Became not just about a diagnosis or going to the clinic or things going wrong. It became something that everybody realized we all have, and we all have to look after it. And that just became overnight, that ultimately sort of became just ubiquitous, which was great, because that's something that Woebot would have always argued himself. But and then the other thing, of course, was that the need for digital services, it became beyond just convenience and cost saving. It became about safety. And then people started to realize, actually, there's real benefit to services that you can access at 2 a.m. right, and 3 a.m. Which are really different to traditional therapy. So we had a little bit of digital adoption with what we call telemedicine, which is basically seeing your therapist over a video conference. But what we do is really different. It's really designed to be a sort of a tool in the moment of need, which is actually really different to conventional therapy, where you're sort of discussing the previous week. We found there's something, if you can engage in the tools in the moment that you really need to, that's a very clinically powerful moment. So we built for that.
So I have to say that's an amazing statement there. I wasn't thinking that, because you can do video meetings with your doctor, but the ability to use a digital tool is that 24/7 nature as we talk about it. But just explain to me, Alison, are practitioners threatened by this tool? Because very often, commentary you would read in the press, rightly or wrongly, would suggest that, doctors, physicians, professionals, but have said for years they want to spend time with their physician, number one, and the physicians themselves who have spent years studying and researching. Is there an element of, well, actually, you can't put me in a box because this is people dealing with people as well? How do you counter both those arguments?
The problem is there aren't enough of them. I mean, and that capacity issue has been there for a very long time. And of course, the pandemic just really served to highlight it. But what we do is really different. And I think we've come to think of the model of 2 people in a room as being the absolute gold standard, but it's only one way of many. Just like there's a lot of remote services that you can do that are part of the medical system. We will always need the medical people and the humans in the loop. But the truth about some of the more conventional therapeutic approaches, I mean, the more traditional, the more recent therapeutic approaches like cognitive behavioral therapy actually rely a lot on people rallying their own resources to look at the ways in which they're thinking and how it might be skewed and how it might be distorted, or look at the things that you're actually doing day to day. It's not about understanding what happened to you in your childhood. And what happens is, in that model, if you are not beside somebody when they're struggling to get out of bed, or if your therapist is not with you at 2 a.m. when you're having a panic attack, we are leaving a lot of clinical value on the table. And there's a lot of data that shows the more people engage in those kinds of exercises in the moment that they need to, the better their outcomes are going to be. And that's true of whether there's a human therapist there or not. So I think, yeah, I mean, I appreciate discussions like this, because we really have to get to a much more nuanced conversation about, like, what are the humans great for and what can be taken off of their plate, so that we have, from a systems point of view, just a much more efficient system, and we don't have these long wait lists. I mean, it's just it's not okay that people need to wait so long to get an appointment, if one's even available, or wait to be so severe before they can be put in touch with community services. So we think there's just a lot of room for innovation and a lot of room to bring on additional tools into what is, should be a comprehensive ecosystem of different services.
It's fascinating that, because again, it's like having a doctor, physician, clinical psychologist in your pocket, which I can imagine is amazing. I'm thinking of the advantages here as well. We are human and we're subject to error, and we are human and we're subject to bias.
Correct.
And I can't think that I would perform particularly cognitively well at 2 a.m. in the morning. The tooling itself, have you noticed an accuracy or a higher instance of solve by using unbiased, consistent 100% rules and data evidence? How does that compare against really good physicians or clinicians?
So this is such a wonderful question. There hasn't been a sort of a neck to neck kind of comparison. There aren't very good clinical data for psychotherapy sessions, as you can imagine. It's a very sort of human field, and so not a lot of people gathering data. But however, one of the most interesting things that we notice with this technology, to the point of human bias, we published a paper recently. We gave 36,000 of our users a measure called the Working Alliance Inventory, which is sort of a measure of therapeutic bond. And I think people have always thought that digital services will always be somewhat limited because there isn't that human warmth and connection. And what we discovered was actually Woebot was creating a bond, a therapeutic bond, as measured by the gold standard measure for this, within just 3 to 5 days of an initial conversation, and it was clearly in the human range. So it's the same score as human therapists are getting with their human patients. Now, here's the interesting thing, is that in studies where we've looked at the sort of demographics and the bond scores that people get accorded to, that we find that the bond scores are actually highest for people who are not white, or who choose other for gender, or who have lowest educational attainment, which is the exact opposite of what we see in the traditional treatment outcomes literature. And it really does suggest that this kind of technology has the potential to kind of circumvent or transcend those stereotypes and the sociocultural baggage, right? So it means that when people are interacting, they just can be another person that this thing is interacting with. They don't have to worry about how am I appearing to this person, all of the stereotypes. They're not there. And it's just I think it speaks volumes to the potential of this technology.
That's amazing, because we hear so much all the time about AI bias, but
Yes.
that's the opposite. That's actually removing the bias that's in there on a consistent, de-socio-baggaged way.
Yes. Yes.
You mentioned one, though, Alison, as well, though, that people are, and I'll just pick on the word momentarily, bonding with their AI. Is there, a medical ethical, is there a human ethical side to that? I'm assuming people are told straight up, this is a piece of AI. We're not masquerading as, a human. Or is there actually an issue with that? Because I don't mind talking to technology all day long.
Yeah.
It's almost appealing that I forget it's, a piece of tech if the tech is that good. But I'm
Yes.
just wondering specifically when it comes to something so mental, emotional, personal, have
Yes.
we guidelines or guard rules we should be
Um,
putting in place?
It's good. It's a great question, because I think people can, we can, it can sound a bit dystopian, this notion. And then, and I kind of looked into, we've reflected on this for a really long time. Obviously, when we published our first randomized control trial in 2017, you could see that people were saying, my God, this feels like much more like a friend than an app. And you could see people sort of stepping into this kind of fiction of Woebot as a character. And we built Woebot as a character specifically because we thought, well, character is the best way that we can embody the values, the principles that he has, the way in which that he's going to conduct himself in the therapeutic session. Character is a device, right? It's a creative device that you use to be able to embody that. And so it makes it a bit more natural for people. But when we talk about bond, we're talking about the definition as defined by what measures it, right? This is a classic psychologist answer, but it's true, I can't help it. And when you look at the item by item, what constitutes bond, it really means, I trust this, I trust Woebot, and I trust, and Woebot's not judging me, and I can do whatever I do, Woebot still won't judge me. I trust Woebot to tell me the truth. I feel seen, I feel heard. And again, why would we not build technology to deeply understand where somebody's coming from, to be trustworthy, and to demonstrate that it's not judging you, right? There's no judgment. I mean, we've talked a lot about tech being untrustworthy, right? That's especially in the era of like our data being a product. But so I think this is, again, it's another one of those things that's, it's a very interesting potential here. Because for me as an interaction model, gosh, I don't know why we wouldn't be building tech in that way, right?
I love that. So tell me this then, if we look forward over the next 3 or 5 years, if we can do that at the pace of technology, personally, I'm looking at a society that is increasingly, medical health costs more, medical need is growing up, number of physicians and specialists is actually going down. Where do you see this technology leading us over the next 3 to 5 years, or technologies like this as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're about to have a much more nuanced understanding about the things that the clinical tools that are clinically validated, that are effective and safe, and how to put them in the hands of people so that they are engaged in their own care at the front end. So we think, things like, I mean, part of the inspiration for Woebot was cognitive behavioral therapy as a model of therapy is just it's good life skills, and you always think when you're a clinician learning this, think, wow, they should be teaching this stuff in schools. I don't know why they aren't. And I really don't know why they don't. And so, but it's not always sufficient, right? It's just like, but right now our service is saying every time you have the slightest leak, you have to call a plumber. Whereas really, sometimes you can fix the leak yourself and sometimes you need a plumber. And the trick is knowing when you can do one and when you need more help. And so services like ours also need to be very clear about the line and the limitation of the service, and then hand off to a human. But we really have to have, like, we have to flatten the curve. That's what it's about, right? We've been talking about that for the last 18 months. It's the same across all of medicine. We can't have everybody go from zero to specialist. There has to be an in-between. And also what's beautiful about this model is that when you learn some skills to help yourself, you carry those skills with you throughout the rest of your life. And sometimes the slightest nudge, the slightest like course correction gets you back onto the trajectory of just kind of being healthier and happier. And it is kind of, sometimes it's the small tweaks. And if we can get people then at that point, then we avoid more problematic problems down the road. And of course, so that's it. I just think we're going to get better. We're going to get more patient empowerment, patient kind of driven tools, and that can only be a good thing.